Hi, everyone. Welcome to part one of the American Revolution. Our questions to think about. How were John Locke's ideas incorporated into the Declaration of Independence? And what is the ambiguity in the final paragraph of the Declaration of Independence? How is this issue solved by the Articles of Confederation? When we come into this story in late 1775 and early 1776, men like Samuel Adams, George Washington, John Hancock, Benjamin Franklin, they are convinced that the American colonies need to separate from Great Britain. But a lot of other colonists weren't on that same page. In fact, we could describe a spectrum of views on the topic. An important moment comes in January of 1776 when Thomas Paine, a recently arrived English immigrant, wrote a 50-page pamphlet in which he attacked allegiance to the monarchy. This was one of the things that was really hanging people up. They saw themselves as not just subjects of the king, but almost like a spiritual connection between people and their ruler. And so removing themselves from the British Empire wasn't as simple to them as a political disconnection. There was something more. And this is where Thomas Paine comes in. His pamphlet, Common Sense, gets right to the root of that matter by saying that this is not an equitable relationship, that the king basically doesn't love you. And the pamphlet sold thousands of copies in just a few weeks, and it really does play a major role in convincing the American public to push for independence rather than remaining part of the British colonial system. So coming into 1776, the Second Continental Congress is going to form a committee to draft a formal Declaration of Independence. And even though this was supposed to be a group activity, much of the writing of the Declaration of Independence fell exclusively on Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson is going to rely very heavily on the philosophy of John Locke. So in 1690, English philosopher John Locke published his two treatises on government, in which he argued that people are endowed with natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that people establish governments to protect those rights. He goes on to say that if the current government fails to protect the rights of the people, then the people had the right to overthrow the government. This is both simple and profound in the sense that we as human beings form governments in order to protect our most basic rights. So we consent to be governed. But if the government is not doing what it was created to do, then we have the right to replace that government. And so it's this idea that appears in the Declaration of Independence. In May of 1776, the Second Continental Congress authorized all 13 colonies to form themselves into new state governments. And then on July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress voted for independence, which was formally adopted 2 days later. I want to take a closer look at the Declaration of Independence simply because most people have not read all of it. So one of the most famous lines in the Declaration of Independence comes here. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So as we read this paragraph, we can see very clearly the influence of John Locke. But what a lot of people notice is the line that says all men are created equal. And they call out the hypocrisy of Thomas Jefferson for writing these lines and yet owning slaves. It's important to understand that Thomas Jefferson didn't mean all of mankind was equal. What he meant was the white free men of the colonies are equal to the white free men in Britain. And what's interesting is over the course of our history, we've changed the meaning of that phrase to mean all of mankind are equal. I want to also draw your attention to the very last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So this last paragraph is sort of the declaration part of the Declaration of Independence. We are formally declaring ourselves to be independent. But I want to draw your attention back to about the middle of this paragraph, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. That's plural. Drop down a couple of lines and they say, as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, etc. But when we think about the word state, it has two meanings. It can be a state like a nation, and Jefferson says that here, the state of Great Britain, or the state of Israel. But a state can also be a province, a portion of a country. So if we think about Canada, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Quebec, these are provinces within the nation of Canada. So the question comes up, are we talking about these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states as provinces or as nations? Because if they have full power to levy war, that's interesting. The state of Texas doesn't have the power to declare war, but the state of Great Britain does. So there's a big question mark here at the end. There's a bit of ambiguity here. Are we creating 13 independent nations? Or are 13 individual states declaring themselves independent to form the United States of America? Question mark. That question is actually answered in the Articles of Confederation. So in November of 1777, we are going to have the Second Continental Congress draft the first government of the United States of America, one nation. They called it a perpetual union. Take a look at the title here. Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union between the states of, and they're all listed there. So each of these states has agreed to form what is essentially a permanent alliance, because a confederate form of government involves incredibly strong state governments and weak national government holding everything together. In our next topic, we'll go into a little more detail about how and why this is problematic. So coming back to our questions to think about, how were John Locke's ideas incorporated into the Declaration of Independence? Jefferson is essentially using John Locke's ideas to justify the colonies breaking away from the British government. The main part of the Declaration of Independence lists the grievances against the king, and it's for those reasons that the colonies say that they have the right to break away from the British Empire and to establish their own government so that their rights can be protected. And then what is the ambiguity in the final paragraph of the Declaration of Independence? The ambiguity is, did we create 13 independent nations, or did we create one nation with 13 states? Question mark. And then how is this issue solved by the Articles of Confederation? It's solved because of the phrase perpetual union, that these states are joining together to create the United States of America, one nation. We're going to come back to that issue later on, so I want you to really look closely at those moments in the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation, which also make up part of your journal assignment. So stay tuned for part 2 of the American Revolution.